This next panel is going to have a great group of folks here to talk about subsea cables and everything related to them. So as I call your individual names, if you guys can come up and come up to the stage, that'd be great. So first I have Gerardo Bonilla from Telxius. He's going to be on the panel. Hunter Newby from Newby Ventures is going to join us. Michael Ortiz with Layer 9 Data Centers. Scott Brown with Pixel Factory Data Center. Craig Waldrop with Interaction. And of course, our fearless moderator, Vinay Nagpal. And enjoy.
It's been such a phenomenal day today. Again, thank you everyone for being here. And in continuation of our discussion around subsea, the importance of subsea cables being a catalyst of the digital economy, feeding local connectivity, that's a very important aspect of this panel discussion, because generally speaking, when we think of subsea, we think of, obviously, the subsea cables are connecting continents together, they're connecting countries together. In case of, a Festoon cable, for that matter, thank you, Eckert, for all the information you've shared about Festoon cables. They are connecting the coastline of a country or a continent to basically provide connectivity. And in case of the east coast of US, there is a new cable being in the works, which is going to be providing a diverse alternate connectivity to the I-95 Amtrak corridor. So we have a distinguished guest or panelist here. I'd like to have them introduce themselves, give a quick background about their involvement with subsea, and hopefully we'll have the person we are missing, Hunter Newby, join us as well. But Craig, in the order of your sitting, why don't we start with you? Craig Waldrop.
Thank you, Vinay. Craig Waldrop. I'm here on behalf of Interaction, which is owned by Digital Realty. I've been with the company now 7 months, but I've been in this industry back since about 2002. So I've seen a lot of great things happen, and very humbled and honored to be here, Vinay. It's very special, especially that last section. As a father of 3 daughters, it's really great to see that we're going to have a next generation that's not only going to care for this internet that we've built, but is going to take it to the next level. So very happy to be here, and hope I can add some value to the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Craig, for being here. I mentioned earlier about subsea connectivity and the local relevance of the local connectivity with the subsea cables. I don't think there would be a better befitting person to talk about that than Scott Brown. Scott, I consider him to be multifaceted, and there's Hunter Newby. Please make your way up here. They're looking at the right stage where you need to sit. Scott Brown, yes, you're doing good. There you. Okay, Hunter Newby, you're good, you're good. No, you're good. Scott Brown, as I said, a multifaceted person in terms of running a data center, a local data center, which I want him to talk to you about and share the value proposition, Internet Exchange Point, which is now part of the DKIX network. And one of the value proposition, back to my initial conversation with Ivo, was that Ivo was very particular. Vinay, we want to keep the local aspect of the exchange. We want to keep the community aspect of it, and Scott's been a champion of doing that. And third is the network component. He runs a network business, highly respected in the community. Scott.
So I got to come clean. Vinay and I met a couple weeks ago and had breakfast, and he said, well, where do you think you can help out in the program? And I said, well, that subsea cable, I think I can tie it all together. So then he sent me the list, and I went, Hunter Newby Fiber Center. Connect a continent, Gerardo, connect another continent. I believe you've got a 96 megawatt data center coming online. Our entire facility is 10,000 square foot, and we're 0.96 megawatts. So at scale of comparison, I was like, great. Way to go, Scott. You stepped up to the plate and jumped into but I think I can connect the dots, how it gets down to the local community. Vinay had mentioned RVAX. I think Scott Coonfield here, VA Skywire, and Justin Miller are here. They're part of the founders that started RVAX, and what we took and started, DKIX is going to continue and accelerate it. It's going to bring just fantastic stuff to this community and region. Richmond's a tier 2 city, 1.3 million people, and in our facility we carry approximately, we're taking an estimate, about 22% of the traffic in the city. passing through our facility, which is just staggering to imagine in such a small facility. Most of our customers are like the multi-dwellings with Skywire and electric co-ops. I think Gary Wood's going to speak later about Firefly. They're just connecting homes as fast as they can, connecting the last mile, and we head in for them. So I'm going to steal Eric's comment earlier about the optical highway meets the rural internet user at the home and changing lives. So it's just in a nutshell.
That's very well said, and I think the conversations I've had with Scott have really made me realize that the impact of the digital infrastructure locally to the community, what that truly means. So thank you, Scott, for those conversations. Continuing my personal friendship, Michael Ortiz. So I've had the good fortune of working with him at DuPont Fabros Technology, my previous company. Michael and I tag team a lot of sales deals, and I'm supporting him on connectivity services. So we kept in touch, we stayed in touch, and here we are. Michael Ortiz has recently launched a new data center company, Layer 9 Data Centers, in South America, in Mexico, and I'll let him explain his plans there, and also in terms of the strategic importance for him and his new company between data centers and subsea. Michael?
Vinay, thank you for having us. First and foremost, we are a development company that is specifically targeting Latin America as a generational development firm. And we say that because this is a part of the world that is highly unconnected and is rapidly on the rise relative to data usage, but more so education, right? This is a society of 640 million residents, for which you might be surprised that in just the last 2 years, 150 million Latin Americans got online for the first time, okay? So this puts things into perspectives, right? If we're in the 4th or 5th inning of a ball game in the United States, the lights haven't even gone on in Latin America, right? And in terms of the data consumption, among all emerging markets throughout the world, Africa, Asia, Latin America has the highest income per capita, highest usage of data per capita, and the fastest growing segment of middle-aged, middle-income residents than any other part of the world.
Very good, Michael. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Of course, we were talking about Virginia earlier with Eric Contact briefly. He brought up Maria, he brought up BRUSA. Maria being the first subsea cable to land in the Commonwealth of Virginia, BRUSA being the second one. Gerardo Bonilla, who's with us from Telxius, has been intimately involved with those subsea cables in Virginia, and of course a lot more as part of Telxius's portfolio, and plays a leadership role as part of the sales team, and part of his team is here as well. Gerardo, over to you.
Yes, hi, thanks Vinay, thanks for having us, pleased to be here. So I've been with Telefonica Group Telxius. Telxius is a majority owned by Telefonica. Been with the company for going on 13 years. Telxius is an international infrastructure provider. We manage a subsea network consisting of over 60,000 miles of subsea cable and terrestrial backhaul. We also manage a global tier 1 IP network that has access to over 350 million customers. We have several cables. Up to now, prior to Virginia, all our activity was focused on Latin America. Telefonica, owning several fixed and wireless companies in Latin America, had the need for an international network. So a few years ago, we were spun off from Telefonica as Telxius. So we managed the subsea, all the international network, which includes the subsea network and the international IP network. So Virginia is new for us. Like I said, about 4 years ago, we landed the first 2 cables, the BRUSA and the Maria cable system, and most recently the Do Not cable system that we landed in Virginia Beach. So some of the main drivers there, I think they were briefly touched on, but a requirement in 2012, it became evident that we needed a third landing site on the eastern seaboard, and that location ended up being Virginia. So one of the primary drivers for the cables was the need for diversity. And then another major motivator or driver of both of those cables was the concentration of data centers in Ashburn, Virginia. So Data Center Alley. So our cables, so our BRUSA cable from Latin America into Virginia Beach is the most direct, lowest latency path in from Latin America, and from Southern Europe to Data Center Alley, our Maria cable system is the shortest, lowest latency path.
And Gerardo, for the Maria cable being an open access cable system, you've already upgraded the capacity of that system over the last couple of years, like multiple times. Can you talk a little bit about that and set some context around what the current capacity is across the Atlantic and what that means?
Sure. So when we started planning for the Maria cable system, the initial design capacity was 160 terabits. And thanks to the advances in technology, by the time the cable was put into service, we're up to 200 terabits. So we saw a phenomenal increase, and some of our partners on the system, for example, Facebook, have tested and gotten up to 30 terabits per fiber pair, so even more. But yeah, the capacity, tremendous amount of capacity, and until the Google Do Not cable system, Maria was the highest capacity transatlantic cable system. It's an 8 fiber pair system. As these systems, the new systems come in, there's more and more capacity, more and more fibers. So the Do Not is a 12 fiber pair system, and the newer systems that are in the works today are even more. So every day more capacity.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You know, when I hear about subsea cables capacity, the number of cables, I just can't help but think about Marseille. And Craig, as I was talking to you when we first got introduced through Mike Collins, I've had the opportunity to visit Marseille, meet with the team there locally, both in terms of the interaction team and the Port of Marseille. And John Martin and his team from RVA Connects were very impressed with the team from Marseille. We did a webinar for educating the Global Internet Hub team here locally. Explain to us, why is Marseille so special as it is, and what really made it to become the poster child for subsea data center convergence?
Yeah, good question. And I would tell you that it's the model that we're trying to replicate across the globe. And Marseille, we call it, it's the gateway for Europe to get to the Middle East, to get to Africa, and certainly to get to Asia. So geographically speaking, it's aptly positioned to be that for the European markets. And they say with the cable systems that are in there today, I think you have access to about 4.5 billion people across the globe. That's roughly half the world's population.
Did you say 4.5 billion people?
Yes, 4.5 billion people. Make that note. And it's a wonderful story to show how important subsea is, right? It's integral to our company's strategy, right? We have facilities all over the world, and it starts with connectivity. And if you look at Marseille in particular, back in 2011-ish, there was maybe 10 cables at the time, and it was really just a transit point. So this is a place where transit traffic was hopping on and hopping off, and it was really nothing more than that. But you fast forward to maybe 2014, and then you start to see a community emerge. And it starts with companies like DKIX and other IXs coming in there and traffic becoming peered. And then you look at local networks that are there serving the local community. And it starts becoming this cycle of building upon each other. And then you fast forward even further, you've got 15 cables, and we're actually just launching one today. With 2Africa, and we had another one earlier this year. Pardon me, I don't remember the name.
The 2Africa is done, by the way. I saw the LinkedIn post from Mike Collins. He posted some pictures.
Yeah, so today was actually the launch of it, and that's going to open up the rest of the African continent, and a really important cable for the world, and Africa in particular, so we're super proud of that. But Marseille, again, is what we call the poster child, or the use case for building a community. And that's central to our differentiation and our value proposition. It's not just a data center, it's what happens inside of it. And we're largely focused on the breakout, right? Because the breakout for us means lots and lots of interconnectivity. But if you peel back and see what that interconnectivity is used for, it's really powering the connectivity and the internet for the rest of the world.
Right, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that you're right about the breakout, you're right about in terms of where the SLTE resides. And Hunter, when we first started talking about subsea cables, I still remember, you used to tell me about Shirley, Bellport, Brookhaven, all these names, and I was not very familiar at that time. And historically, that's where most of the Northeast subsea cables in the Long Island have landed. Obviously, even if you look at the last 5, let alone 10 years, a lot has changed in terms of the landscape of the landings of the cables on the east coast of U.S., Hunter. And at the same time, there are some systems that are connecting within U.S., but obviously going in the wet plant, going as wet systems. So what have been your observations in this time and the changes that have taken place, and how have you seen that impacting the internet traffic?
Wow, great question. Thanks for having me. So earlier when I was listening to Raymond, he said mega I, that like blew me out of my chair, because that took me back to my old telex days at 60 Hudson. And then I started to think about the interactions that I've had with submarine cables. Like, when did I first realize that it was important? And I started to make little notes, because I had no idea. Like, I've never even sat down and thought about this. So this is like the magical mystery
You
tour
want to get the
here.
mic?
2000, so I came out of WorldCom in 96 to 98. That's where I learned how not to do everything, do the opposite, and be wildly successful. And then the predecessor to Telex was a 214 called Telex Communications, and we used to arbitrage voice, international wholesale, origination, termination, in 60 Hudson. And then I didn't like Lex, so I decided to cut them out and build IXCs directly into my facility. And then I met with a guy from Deutsche Telekom at a Supercom in Atlanta, and I said, you got to move into my facility. And that's how I got TAP 14. And that was 2000. And I started looking at submarine cable map infrastructure, which back then, telegeography, like that was like, it didn't exist. And I realized that there were only 7 cables in the North Atlantic that connected the continents. And I thought, wow, you know, there's all these ISPs and IXCs and whatever, but there's only 7 of these. If I get those 7, then everything that comes off or on to go between will come through my room, right? So I got TAP 14, and then I got Apollo, then I got AC1, I got Yellow, I got Tycho, I got Flag North and South, and then ultimately in 06, Hibernia Atlantic. And I look around the room, I see Mike Sauer over there, MCI, yeah, Reliance. That's how it all got started for me. And then MaxSAC and GlobeNet. And that's Contag. I mean, I've known Contag forever. And from Telex, the 9th floor, 60 Hudson, which used to be the Department of Buildings for the city of New York, it was gutted, and then we built the facility. There was nothing, and then there was all that. It was the Ellis Island of networks to get between Europe and US. And then Hibernia, of course, being in Halifax. And if I fast forward through that, I mean, I don't even want to bother you with all these other things that I've done and all these other submarine cables I've been involved in, but I got concerned about the number of submarine cables that we had concentrated onto one floor in one building in New York City. The bridges, the tunnels, the manholes, all the points of failure. So I said, oh boy, I got to get them out of here. So in 2007, I started a facility called LightArc at 1025 Old Country Road, which became Ancatel USA. My friends from Germany came over and took it over. And then that turned into 1025 Connect, which is now NYI. Phil Koblenz is running that place now. And I had Yellow, AC1, MaxSAC, and then Aquacom's AC1 came through there. And then in 2015, I got together with Gil Santalese, and we created NJFX, which was the first of its kind dedicated neutral cable landing station at the beach. And we bought the land from Tata, and we built Tycho 2, basically. And the number of new cables that came in there, and I would just accelerate AC2, but bulk infrastructure. Talk about new stuff that's going on, and what Peter's done. But the one that you asked me, Vinay, to talk about specifically, and I'll get to the economic development thing, because it directly relates to Henrico and what happened when I came here about 5 years ago and met with Twyla.
I think he means Twyla. I was going to just say that. Twyla, where are you, please?
Yeah, Twyla.
Can you raise it higher, please?
She's amazing. Yeah. She did it. She's the reason why this is all happening. And Vinay, Twyla. Hats off to Twyla.
This is for Twyla Powell, Henrico Economic Development Authority. Twyla.
So just final on that. So in 2014, December, me and a different partner, these are all different deals, we bought the Atlantic Lottery headquarters building in Moncton, New Brunswick in Canada. Most people in Canada don't know where Moncton is. I picked the spot because I knew that Hibernia amped the subsea there terrestrially. There's a wet piece that goes down to Lynn, Mass, which is just north of Boston, but that's the part, the overland route. And then I got Hibernia to move out of the Bell Canada they were in and move into our building. And the city of Moncton became our first customer, and then Hibernia, and then they did the breakout, and then Express, and so on. And, you know, up there in sleepy little Moncton, a province of 900,000 people, we have, you know, Microsoft and Facebook and Google and, you know, big fiber providers, Bell, Rogers, and now TELUS is putting a major transport hub in our facility to connect to Europe and multiple continents. But what was really amazing, what I didn't realize that we were doing, I mean, I'm doing international subsea gateway stuff like I've been doing forever. Assumption Life, which is a big life insurance company up in the Maritime provinces, they came to us and we introduced them to reality. They were buying internet transit from Bell Canada for $30 a meg. And we introduced them to Hibernia, not like, you know, the greatest, it was good IP, whatever, but it's not like there's some big shake layer 3 guys. And they started buying transit from Hibernia for $1.50. And now, and Hurricane Electric moved in, of course, Reed came up there, and now he's selling them transit for probably 10 cents or something. So we got a letter from the president of Assumption Life, me and Yuri, and if anybody knows Yuri, you know this guy is like, he's a character. The president of Assumption Life thanked us for changing their business because they didn't know that they could buy internet transit at a rate that was so affordable that they could increase the amount of capacity that they had and actually run their business properly online. It transformed the economy of this little town in this province because then one led to another, and all of a sudden businesses are coming in going, hey, wait a second. We heard about this $1.50 internet thing, so that's not like just 2 websites, right? Like, that's the whole internet? Like, yeah. And the next thing you know, Moncton, of course with a Hurricane Electric node, and their map, and they report this stuff on LinkedIn and other places, but they're on the map. They're no different than Hong Kong or Tokyo or London, you know, Moncton. And we've got a lot of accolades. And I see that when I met with Twyla, and we were down here taking a look at then Facebook was just taking trees down. And I had no idea where I was. I was all turned around. They had us in a minibus driving all over the place. And we went to the Henrico office, and I said, okay, let me guess. We're about 100 miles from Virginia Beach, and we're about 100 miles from Ashburn. Is that about right? He's like, yeah. I said, that's why they're here. They're amping their subsea. And with a breakout between what QTS has and what Scott has at Pixel Factory, you guys are golden. And I've been saying this since I met Twyla. Henrico is the next Loudon. And I heard someone say that earlier today. I forget who that was. And it's true. So acres are going to go 10x, just like they did in Loudon. And you can learn a lot from what they did right and wrong, but economic development happens when this occurs. And I've done this many times in lots of places. So I'm seeing something that I've seen before. So congratulations, you're next, you're it.
Thank you so much, Hunter, for sharing that perspective. I think you're right in terms of, you know, seeing those different foundational building blocks being there and coming together to kind of have that vision of what that looks like. And that's where I think the Henrico Economic Development Authority team has been very hands-on in making the most of it. Scott Brown, we talked earlier in my opening remarks about the local aspect of subsea cables. Share with us how you see that progressing going forward, and how do communities take advantage of more of these systems coming in, and what more needs to be done from an industry perspective?
That's a very spot-on question. So if you would have asked me that 3 years ago, I would have said there would have been, the subsea cables would have had an impact because economic development was going to occur around the area and stuff. And we're looking now with the electric co-ops and the multi-dwelling fiber customers that we have that light up apartment complexes. We're seeing traffic that I never thought would see going to Latin America and stuff, and now we haul it now to Ashburn to go south. And last week, or 2 weeks ago in LA, I met with Geraldo's team to talk about, for 2023, connecting directly to Telxius in Virginia Beach on the subsea cable to steer traffic that way for the shortest latency path. I wouldn't have thought of that a couple years ago. That would have not been on my radar as a data center of 10,000 square feet. That would have not been the foresight or whatsoever. And how that translates to the customer at home. Firefly, they went to their, I think they lit their 10,000th customer, probably was about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And they had a teacher come up, and they had just turned on fiber to her home, and she was incredibly emotional. And I just was thinking, okay, this can't be, but why is she so emotional about it? And she started talking about that she couldn't do her grades and her reporting for the kids over her hotspot in her house, and that she had to stay at school either early in the morning or late in the afternoon. And when Gary brought her on stage, she started talking about that she picked up an extra 5 hours a week with her family because she could do her grades and work at home after her kids went to bed. And it was just staggering to think that traffic's flying through our facility and how much it's changing her life. It was pretty impressive.
I think that's when you talked about earlier in terms of making an impact on people's lives. That's for real. That's happening. It's happening now. Michael, in terms of Mexico, the opportunity there, the landscape you're navigating with, what's that like? What do we have there from a subsea perspective? What are you looking at from a forward-looking standpoint?
I would say it's 2 words: Star Trek. In terms of the opportunity. We think about the amount of people that are connected globally, right? Approximately 68 cables drop in throughout Latin America, for which nearly 60% of them are over 15 years old, which means those cables within the next 5 years are going to need to be replaced. In a population that is gulping down data 11x its population growth. In Mexico specifically, the cost of data, the power purchase parity test that we all learn in MBA school, right? The price of a Big Mac in London, Amsterdam, San Francisco, and Beijing. The price of that power, the price of that gigabyte has dropped precipitously in Latin America because of deregulation. But let's take apart specifically the 5 big regions, because Latin America is really 5 large regions. And would you know that within those 5 regions, over 370 languages are spoken? That's an amalgamation of countries all around the world that have all moved there now, right? And as I mentioned earlier, it's the largest middle income class in the world, gulping down data in massive amounts. A family in Mexico 5 years ago was gulping down just about 2.5 gigabytes per month, a family of 4. That same family is now biting down on 27 gigabytes of data per month. And because the cost of data has come down and COVID has accelerated the migration to the cloud, Latin America is no indifferent. Enterprises have now moved to the cloud because it's a safer play. It's a distributed workforce that now mandates to be connected equally in Guadalajara as it is for Mexico City, as it is for Monterrey. And as a result, the cloud has come down in droves. Querétaro, let's say that 3 times. It took me about 60 times to say it right. Querétaro is the data center alley of Latin America, period. It is the Ashburn in 2001. There is 485 megawatts chasing 38 megawatts of supply. 11x imbalance. Imagine if that was the imbalance in Ashburn right now. 11x. And up to this date, colocation has been a retail colocation, middle-sized companies, 500 kilowatts, 200 kilowatts, 2 megawatts maybe. All the incumbents, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, Meta, have all announced major nodes in the Querétaro region. And why is Querétaro so important? Because it is smack dab in the middle of the country. No, it is because it is in the industrialized zone of Mexico. which generates north of 65% of its GDP on finished goods. And what do I say finished goods? I'm not talking about radios. I'm talking about cars, airplanes, locomotives, generators, high-level finished product, as compared to, say, countries in other parts of South America where a third, maybe half of the GDP are raw materials, ore, gold, silver. Mexico, as I like to say, holds the handkerchief and holds the Kleenex when America gets cold, right? Close allies, closest allies to the United States than any other country. And because of the proximity, the need for submarine cables couldn't be more prevalent. When we think about all the IBXs throughout the United States, right? Hunter can name them in the back of his hand. There's less than a dozen in Mexico. Less than a dozen that connect 238 million Mexican Americans, Mexican Latin Americans. So the opportunity is massive, which is why when I started that we're a generational development company, because we came out of the blocks wanting to change the way that market is perceived, because for years, Mexico's always just been an exporter of talent, right? Finished goods. But what if I told you the University of Monterrey Technology School is considered the Harvard of Mexico? It drops with its 36 campuses over 100,000 students, for which nearly a third of them are STEM graduates. And what they're doing is they're not leaving the country. They're running their family businesses in Monterrey, Guadalajara, Mexico City. And again, let's put it in perspective. Mexico City, 24 million people live in a 25-mile radius. Florida has 21 million people. These are high metro markets. 82% of all of Latin America lives within 50 miles of a major metropolitan market. 90% live within 70 miles of a coast. So for us, the opportunity is massive. The opportunity, we will be the first entrant, market participant. We have first market entry position, but we won't be the only ones. There'll be many more.
And of course, you've got plans to go into other parts of South America as well.
We do. As a result, we've had the privilege of working with Mr. Vinay here. My background comes from Digital Realty and a DuPont Fabros, and we like to coin ourselves, and we've been given the permission from Lamont DuPont to say that we are DuPont Fabros 2.0 SUR. Our model will look like DuPont Fabros, our technology will look like DuPont Fabros, and our customers with whom we've serviced for over 10 years will be following us here, Central America, and eventually back into the Iberian Peninsula.
Yep, absolutely. I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask a question of our panelists. So be prepared with your question. I'll come back to you in a couple of minutes. Gerardo, staying on the theme of South America, you've got extensive experience in South America, of course, through Telxius that has a major investment in the region. Share with us that and how you've seen that change over the years.
So yes, like I mentioned, we're majority owned by Telefonica. Telefonica is the incumbent provider in Spain, but also has other wireless and fixed operations in South America, also in the UK with O2. But in Latin America, that's one of the things that's helped us justify the cables that we build. So like some of the cables that we have, for example, Maria, are done in partnership with hyperscalers, in that case with Microsoft and with Meta. In the case of some of our other cable systems, for example, Brusa, that's a wholly owned cable system, or Mistral, those cable systems are driven by the Telefonica operating companies throughout the region. So one of our newest cable system is called the Mistral cable system, which is a cable system that
What's
comes...
it called?
Mistral, the Mistral cable system. Before we were calling it the Pacific cable system. But this is the Mistral cable system. So that one was done to address the needs of the Telefonica operating companies in Chile, in Peru, Guatemala, and then we also worked in that case with a competing company, which is Claro, or América Móvil, which operates as Claro in the majority of Latin American countries. So we had the same geographic requirements. So working together with América Móvil, we were able to justify the investment in that cable.
Yep, absolutely. I recall that. Let's see who has the question. Who's ready with the question for the audience, for the panelists? Sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Very interested in hearing about the subsea cables and the limited fiber counts. My question is, with a lot of the attacks that have been happening with the gas pipelines and recently in Marseille, how would you suggest we prevent or ensure the security of this ability of, for information not to be used?
How do we ensure the safety of the subsea cable, security of the subsea cable with the attacks happening, like gas on the gas, you said gas pipelines? And Marseille, yes.
More cables.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. More diversity, more cables.
Diversity, diversity, diversity.
But there's also a lot of protection built in already. So for example, our 2 cables come in underneath Camp Pendleton military base. They're in Virginia Beach. And they monitor the cables, right? That says strategic infrastructure for the country. So that's considered, and I think that there's a lot of measures that the government takes there to help protect. But yeah, exactly, more cables.
Okay,
They're
next
strategic
question.
assets. We have to secure them the best we can, but you can't prevent natural disasters, and that's why you have diversity and redundancy.
Yeah, don't be mistaken. It's not necessarily a terrorist problem either, right? A lot of times these cables get cut in half by anchors. Ships that run random, aren't watching the paths, they're already laid out, drop in anchors, splice a line.
Yeah, and there's an international body called ICPC, International Cable Protection Committee, that kind of writes the guidelines and works with different companies and countries, primarily around these issues globally. Okay, question? Anyone else? Yes, last question. Go ahead. You're getting a mic right behind you in 3 seconds.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to try to connect some dots here. Vint and Michael, you and Scott talked about things that have to do with broadband access. In the United States, we used to depend on USF for funding rural broadband, and that's going away. And you look at Starlink and the impact that's going to have on broadband access everywhere. Where does Starlink fit in? Because, Scott, when you were talking about the teacher and how she could finally do things she couldn't do before, any of us that have a family member that lives in a rural environment that got broadband access, like not DSL, but real broadband access, it's a life changer. And Michael, you're going to see that, millions of examples of that as you grow your enterprise. But what happens, how do we fund this in the absence of a USF, for example, in the United States?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. Africa, for example, has 438 million unconnected residents. And as a result, Starlink is being launched in part to help assist for rural last mile connectivity. But in lieu of that, in duplication of that, Meta is dropping a 45,000 kilometer subsea cable that's going to stop at 11 substations throughout Africa, 11 points of contact, right? That 45,000 kilometer line is called 2 Tropical or 2 Optical or something like that. Or no, it's 2 Apricot. And they're going to use that subsea cable line to interconnect, right, all these markets, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Cape Town, all the way up. So Starlink is an assistance, but it's not the crutch, right? And at day's end, you're not going to get the bandwidth speeds that you're going to get off of, 100, 200 terabyte feed.
You talked about Starlink. I currently don't have any satellites. Kudos to Elon on that one, but I've got because of where our locality is and how many people the rural community, we get quite a few phone calls for people asking, what can you do for my connectivity? Starlink is, I think, amazing. It's doing great. But in the basic reality, I've got people that call on a regular basis that say they've been on the list for a year. So it's not going to be a single source solving this problem. It's a multifaceted, multi-group, multi-fiber provider, multi-dwelling provider. So it's going to be more than one. But Starlink is definitely a great start. But it is certainly not going to solve it in a reasonable time frame.
Okay, thank you. Last question I have for the panelists, 60 seconds each. 60 huts, speaking of 60 huts on 111 8th Avenue, 21715 Filigree Court. These buildings that are known by their addresses globally, interconnection hubs. Do we have enough of these? Do we need more? If so, what do we need to do?
Yes, we need more, and it actually speaks to the question there. And it's not about everything backhaul into the traditional carrier hotels. It's bringing the essence of neutral interconnection out to where it's needed. And that's actually something I do with these guys right here, Connected Nation. So talking about funding, I would yield my time to them to explain to you how the grants work. I actually worked with them to write the IX bill language that's in the Middle Mile grant that we actually applied for ourselves. And it's the first time Internet Exchange and Internet Exchange Point were actually grant eligible defined elements ever in any broadband grant. And they'll tell you the story, because when we met, I asked them what carrier hotels they had been to so we could sort of level set, because I've been to pretty much all of them. And they asked me, what's a carrier hotel? And I'm like, and that's the problem with rural broadband. So real estate, neutral interconnection real estate, which is a big topic here today, solves the broadband problem. Because if you have a neutral landlord, you have a place where the content providers can put their equipment, where the local metro and fiber to the home can be, and where the long haul can meet. But without that, no one's willing to host the other guy's equipment. And that's the same problem that I saw at 60 Hudson Street in the 90s, which is what gave birth to Telex. So more facilities like that with them, and we've mapped out the whole country. We know where all the pain points are. Basically, where there isn't an IX, there needs to be one, so that it can localize content and cloud. When we work with universities, they're giving us land on their campuses to build these facilities. And that will help make the country smaller, which is actually a question that was asked of me earlier in my QTS interview. Why do some countries like South Korea seem to have it all figured out, but the United States doesn't? The answer is simple: geography. We're really big, and they're really small. So,
Thank you. Craig?
I agree with just about every one of those points. And being an operator in one of these legacy carrier hotels, we have an interesting economic situation and a geographic problem that has to be solved. In fact, I'm going to New York tomorrow to look at our situation in both 60 Hudson and 111 8th Avenue. And the key challenge is there's just nowhere else to go. And the lease and the real estate in Manhattan is not cheap. And these buildings are old, like you just said. They weren't set up to be these hubs of connectivity, so we've kind of played MacGyver and figured out a way to get it done. But that's not going to scale into the future. So that just means two things. One, you have to find a solution that's near there, or you just have to go somewhere else. And I think it's a combination of those two things. And I wouldn't be surprised if operators like us and others in this carrier-neutral business don't pop up in other markets, or don't come up with unique solutions where they have to own new assets in a market where they're already operating. So definitely agree that it's going to be a combination of those two things.
Thank you, Scott.
Totally different take on everything. Ivo, Mexico. Richmond wants to connect to Mexico. No, the subsea stuff, like I said, a couple years ago, it wouldn't have been on our radar to even fathom of buying transit or connecting to Telxius. It wasn't even remotely a thought. And with the stuff we're seeing, the traffic, but I think it's the electric co-ops and the multi-dwelling, somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 homes or more, and this is what I can extrapolate out from my customers telling me. 7,000 homes a month are coming online in our facility, and it's increasing every month. And what's holding it up is supply chain, and people. So.
Okay.
I'm going to give a very unorthodox answer, and I only got this answer last night from my 8-year-old daughter. My daughter is extremely inquisitive. I have 3 girls, 12, 8, and 6. The 8-year-old is going to cure cancer. This little girl is already taking algebra, and she's in 2nd grade. She asks me every time I go on a trip, who are you going to go meet? And I said, I think I'm going to go meet the man who invented the internet. She tells me, she's like, well, when you see him, can you tell him that I don't like the fact that my Netflix doesn't work all the time? And this is just an example of how quick kids pick up on stuff. Verbatim, she tells me, well, I tell her, Sophia, how do you think you're going to fix this? How do you think we can fix this? Her words exactly. I think you just need to build more of these carrier hotels.
That's the best
Genius.
answer. That's the best answer. I will take that any day. Gerardo?
She's got it. I think she's on it.
Yeah, no, so I think definitely more locations like 60 Hudson are needed. I think one location that has a lot of advantages similar to somewhere like 60 Hudson, and is a growing location for us, is the QTS Richmond NAP. I think there's a lot of similarities with the Richmond NAP that there are with the Miami NAP, one of the larger NAPs. There's a lot of subsea cables coming into Florida. The Miami NAP is close, and it's the biggest point for interconnection with Latin American companies. I think that a similar thing could happen here. Richmond QTS with 3 subsea cable systems coming into QTS Richmond, and the benefit for everyone here in this area is that before to reach this network, you had to go to Florida and then, on through the network. Today, you can access the network. 2 years ago, we fully popped out QTS Richmond with a good arrangement with QTS.
Yeah, I've stopped calling it QTS Richmond now. I call it 6000 Technology Boulevard. So I put them in that list where you only know these buildings by their addresses. So, well, with that, let's give all of our panelists a big round of applause for sharing their thoughts.